tonight later on YouTube. Very good. So let's get started. And the floor is yours, Andrew, for a few introductory remarks. Very happy to have you.
And very happy indeed to be here. Thank you, Rupert, and thank you for the very warm welcome. And I do this with great pleasure. The Deutsch-Britische Gesellschaft, of course, is, as you say, one of several, but nonetheless one very close to my heart. When I attended Jungkönigswinter back in 1993, when I started work at the British Embassy in Bonn at the beginning of my diplomatic career. So I returned to this organisation with great joy in my heart, I think it's fair to say, and you do wonderful work on behalf of the bilateral relationship. And I think it's one of the things that you sort of particularly take note of as somebody in my position, that care and support for the bilateral relationship is very definitely an important part of what you do, but you're not the only actor in that particular drama, and the Gesellschaft plays a big role on stage in that particular context. So thank you for the opportunity today. You are right as well. I'm not the first Andrew Mitchell to have occupied a version of this role. I mean, I'm tempted to say that my predecessor enjoyed himself so much that they've invited him back in some form. Perhaps that's true, but the greatest confusion I think that has so far happened in my career is really associated with the fact that Andrew Mitchell is also a former cabinet minister in the British government, and for many years he received my email and I his, and I can say that I had by far the more interesting time of it as a consequence, but so the perils of having a relatively common name. I was asked to speak for no more than 3 minutes, which is clearly on the basis that people have heard me speak before and know that I need a time limit. So I'll just say a few words by way of introduction on really the state of the world. I suppose that'll get us into a bit of a conversation. And I think it is probably fair to say that this is a moment of unprecedented challenge globally. This is a moment, of course, of conflict, and not just, of course, that conflict so particularly near at hand in Ukraine, but of course in the Middle East as well, in Sudan, and this is a moment at which we reflect on the perils that we all face collectively. Conflict is very definitely part of the world that we are confronting today, but those challenges also extend into weak economic growth and the impact that has on our capacity to act in the world. And it's a challenge that the United Kingdom government faces and the German government faces too. But thirdly too, challenges to the integrity of the institutions that we have built, particularly in the period since the Second World War, but also for those mechanisms for cooperation that in many respects I think we have taken for granted. They have had a huge impact on the prosperity, the stability and the security of the world that we live in. And as anybody who has travelled a little bit and been a student of international affairs will know, stability of institutions and strong institutions are really at the heart of prosperity and security in the world. But these changes also take place at a time of a very profound transformation in two places particularly. We have to move our economies from a high carbon to a low carbon growth model, and that transition is an economic transition of a scale that really we haven't seen for 50 years. One that carries particular challenges with it, that is true, opportunities, but will fundamentally change aspects of the way that we manage our economies, and will pose challenges, particularly in the context of growth and jobs. But that second, then profound transformation, disruptive technology. We talk a lot at the moment about AI, but we can talk equally about quantum, about other forms of technology that ultimately will pose structural challenges, economic, social, as well as, of course, huge opportunities for us. So we're managing challenges at a time of transition, and all of this happening at a moment in which we are also undergoing a profound revolution in how we use and manage information. Social media is having a huge effect, particularly on what is objectively knowable or appears to be objectively knowable about the world, which, whilst we manage these challenges, of course, poses some very deep questions about how we collectively make sense of the world. And this, again, at a time at which power is shifting, and power is shifting not just geographically to the south and the east, but in a very significant way also to the world of media, to the world of business, to the oligarch. And this then driving an interconnected set of changes that are giving us a strand of populism in our political world that, again, we've not seen for many, many decades, which is another question. But let me, in the interests of fomenting a good and constructive conversation, stop there, Rupert, and hand back to you.
Thank you. Thank you for these introductory remarks. I think there's a lot of food here for discussion. I will try and not go too deeply into the social media and artificial intelligence issue, because I'm an absolute immigrant to all that rather than a native, so I'll be quite careful on that one. But I think there are two sort of things we should raise. One thing is the sort of big global picture. And then the second one will be about sort of more sort of detailed issues between UK and Germany. If we look at the global picture, what we see is that something that was sort of very much on the table a few years ago, Britain and the US and Australia and New Zealand sort of teaming up, Canada teaming up, Five Eyes was a sort of word that when used, and that would be Europe on one side and the Five Eyes on the other side. And this seems to have changed. We have the Prime Minister, Keith Starmer, very much taking a lead role in bringing European governments together. He and French President Macron are sort of leading this coalition of five countries, the other three being Italy, Poland, and Germany. And so, what's your feeling? Is this a sort of a political thing because we have Donald Trump breathing down our necks, or is it a real shift in positioning the UK?
Thank you, Rupert. And these are very, very good questions. I mean, I think the way that I would answer that is by saying that since the Prime Minister has been in office, he has led a very considerable effort to strengthen relationships with Germany as a partner and a friend in Europe. So bilateral relationships with important European neighbours, whilst at the same time seeking to forge a new partnership with the European Union. And so if I just take the first and then the second, when the Prime Minister visited in August of last year, he agreed with Chancellor Scholz that Germany and the United Kingdom would negotiate a comprehensive bilateral treaty that, unprecedented, frankly, in the context of our bilateral diplomatic relations, would span the range of our mutual interests, from strengthening our economies through the work we do together on energy policy questions, on climate, on defence and security, on issues of migration, international development, and very importantly, cultural and people-to-people links. And that work went quickly, well, positively, reflecting, I think, the fact that on both sides there was a very strong desire, in fact, to give renewed energy and vigor to the relationship. And that's in context, and I said I'd speak also briefly about what we're doing in the context of the relationship with the European Union. We've now agreed, the Prime Minister will be meeting the President of the European Council on the 19th, the President of the European Commission on the 19th of May, the first bilateral summit between the United Kingdom and the European Union. And we have ambitious work in hand on the combination of security and defence and economic issues that represent those areas where we want to go further to strengthen our relationship. So, to your question, Rupert, we are emphatically strengthening our relationship with Germany and with our European neighbours. And briefly, to the other part of your question, does this imply, therefore, that our relations with other nations are somehow weaker or less important? That's not the case, and we would, in fact, and the Prime Minister has said this many times, reject the idea that this is a choice between a strong relationship with partner X and a strong relationship with partner Y. Actually, we have a very strong relationship with the United States, which is long-standing and deeply embedded. It reflects 80 years of close partnership on matters of defence and security, and the close cultural ties that exist, the people-to-people relationships, and the very deep investment that we have in each other's economies. But then, out there in the wider world, we as partner and like-minded nations, we connect in different constellations at different times to address different issues. And those constellations shift and change as the world around us shifts and changes. And there are moments when we work together with 3 partners, 2, with 5. We work together in different areas on issues to do with Iran policy, for example, in a different constellation to the way that we deal with questions of defence and security cooperation in the Indo-Pacific region. So I don't think that in many respects so much has changed as might first be the case, but it is very definitely the intention of the government that I represent here to make a fresh start and really to strengthen our partnership with Germany and with the European Union.
Yeah. 2 points I'd like to take up from what you said. One point is, my impression is that although, of course, the European Commission is sort of fighting to stay in the game, and we can see the President of the Commission coming out on security issues almost every day, that the 5 big ones would much rather have a new arrangement, a G5 arrangement, for the simple reason that some of the EU members are either very small or are quite obstructive, and so EU politics is a very cumbersome affair, and that in the situation we're in, we should probably have a much closer knit alliance with the 4 or 5 other countries, possibly plus Spain, who can really get down to business quite quickly. Would you agree to that?
Well, of course, one of the aspects of being outside of the European Union is not really having to comment on the role of the European Commission in that particular context. So I shan't. But what I would say is that there is room for multiple forms of cooperation. And as I said earlier on, I think, and it's not a diplomatic point, it's a matter of practicality, that different problems require different constellations of countries to deal with them. And we readily use that formation from time to time to apply to the problem that we see. But it's true too, and let's just bear in mind that Germany's taken a very extraordinary decision and a very welcome one from the British government's perspective now to spend or give itself the facility to be able to spend considerably more on defence and security, as well as, of course, infrastructure and climate. And we have a collective interest, I think, as Europeans, in finding new ways to work together on defence industrial programmes as nations, reflecting the strength of our defence industries. And we would certainly argue that examples such as Airbus are a very good example of how that works in practice between nations, and likewise Eurofighter. There are capabilities that we're going to require in Europe if we're going to defend ourselves effectively that we'll want to be partnering with other combinations of European nations on, and who knows, partners from outside Europe as well. So we certainly need different ways of thinking about different problems and different constellations of partners to work with, and I think that has always been the case and will continue to be.
The other thing you mentioned earlier was this special relationship with the United States. If I'm correct, that was Winston Churchill's invention, so to speak. For some years, one's had the impression that the Americans didn't think quite so much of it as the Brits did. And now, obviously, we have an administration in the US that doesn't think anything of a special relationship to anybody. Would the UK government still like to sort of cling on to it, or has it made up its mind that we're in a new phase and that's sort of over with?
I mean, I would challenge a little bit your characterization in a gentle way, Rupert, since we're amongst friends. I mean, I think
that's what we're talking about, yeah.
Exactly. I mean, simply to say that the President of the United States has been very clear about the value that he attributes to the relationship, and the Prime Minister, when he met the President in the Oval Office, carried an invitation from His Majesty the King to the President to make a state visit to the United Kingdom, which unprecedentedly would be a second state visit, and the President was very pleased to accept that invitation. And it is a demonstration, and he's spoken warmly of the relationship with the United Kingdom, of the strength of that partnership. And we talk frequently and openly and in warm terms. So I don't myself accept the premise that this is in some way a relationship of decades past. Very far from it. It's a very modern relationship. And we're seeking, in similar terms, to look at ways that we can cooperate together on frontier technologies, where countries like the United Kingdom and the United States do have both an interest and leading capability. Because, to your point, you need consistently to remake those relationships if they're going to remain current. And the last thing that you should do is to rest on your laurels and look back to a period and wish that maybe the world was the way that it was 50 years ago. You can't do that because you'll be overtaken by events. So,
Yeah, so we can just hope that we won't have to revise that position after, I think it's 9 o'clock tonight, when President Trump is due to publish his new ideas on tariffs and things. But yeah, we'll wait and see. Let's just shift to sort of more mundane sort of things for a moment before we open it up. A lot of people are worried, our members who have strong individual ties to UK are quite worried about the sort of little barriers that are being put in their way, and of course vice versa, being put in the way of Brits who want to come to Germany, work in Germany, study in Germany, whatever. The latest, of course, is this visa thing in force, I think, since yesterday. And it has some lovely euphemistic name, but it is in fact a visa that non-Brits require. Would you think that as we move on, we might be able to sort of revise some of these sort of post-Brexit things and get back to a sort of more close sort of footing at this level? I mean, it's increasingly difficult for German school children to have sort of excursions to UK, because as soon as they have one child in class who does not have a German passport, it makes it virtually impossible. Artists from UK don't like coming because they have to put on record every single screw they import, and if they miss one screw, the next time they come, there's a frightful sort of kerfuffle about it. So there's lots of sort of little stories like that. Do you see any chance of improving on that again?
So let me just deal first of all with the first issue that you, the first question you asked, Rupert, and I mean, I suppose I just say about this again. Important to recognise that this isn't, in fact, a visa. It may carry some of the characteristics of a visa, but it's really not a visa, and it's for non-visa nationals. And essentially, what an electronic travel authorization does is essentially to permit access and ease of access through an electronic border. And I think, we're all going this way around the world. It's no different from the situation that you would face if you were traveling to the United States, for example, and the European countries themselves are introducing electronic borders, and it mustn't and shouldn't, and certainly isn't designed to operate as a hindrance in any sense to travel backwards and forwards between our countries. Actually, it's a border security mechanism, and at the end of the day, once all of these borders are electronically managed and networked, we ought to be both in a securer and, frankly, an easier world for travellers. So I recognise it's a change, and I don't dismiss that, not for a minute. And I recognise that the charge is a charge to travellers, and it's an additional cost when you're travelling, which will be £16 in due course. And I don't dismiss that the importance of that, but as I say, it is intended essentially to provide for border security, and it's certainly not intended to be a hindrance. But on the broader point, I think it's again well understood. And we sort of recognise, of course, having left the European Union, that there are certain things that are more difficult as a consequence of not being within the single market and the customs union. And we couldn't expect reasonably to have all the benefits of membership of the single market and the customs union when we're outside of the European Union. So there are certain things that are more difficult. Absolutely. However, do we want to make the experience of citizens and nationals moving backwards and forwards between Germany and the United Kingdom as straightforward as possible? We absolutely have that aspiration within the limitations, obviously, that are posed by our being outside the European Union. And we absolutely explore these issues in the context both of the bilateral treaty, and I mentioned a little bit earlier on that the people-to-people aspect of that is very important in the treaty negotiation, but similarly in our new partnership with the European Union. So I can't really promise today how far that'll go, or particularly where, but it is important. It's important to all of us, and the issues, I think, are well understood. We've enough experience of those now to know what those issues are. I don't, under any circumstances, underestimate the difficulty that some of these do indeed cause. I mean, again, the broader point, and I'll stop after this. You know, I'm sitting in the position that I'm in, feel a very strong sense of responsibility for ensuring that our two nations connect in a very deep way, and part of that is about facilitating access to each other in many different ways, including travel. And it's particularly important, I think, for younger people. I had that experience. I was very fortunate myself as a young person, and it marked me very deeply and encouraged me to want to see the world and to travel. And I feel very grateful that I'm in the position I am today, partly as a consequence of that experience as a younger person. And similarly, I think fostering and encouraging language learning is hugely important in that context, because it gives you a reason to travel and an aspiration to travel and a curiosity and an interest. And once you're inside the language, you're inside the literature and inside the music, and to an extent inside the way that your counterpart looks at the world. And so we have a real responsibility to foster and protect all of that. And frankly, there's some really very good things happening there, and good people leading in to try to support and promote that. I did a dinner last night at the residence with members of fellows of the Royal Society based in Germany, in a scientific exchange. And you'd be very encouraged to hear the extraordinary things that are happening between the United Kingdom and Germany in scientific research and development. I'll stop.
Yes. I mean, we're currently quite involved, both as German-British Society and professionally with the Centre for Democratic Resilience, which is being set up at Oxford with Petra Schleiter. I'll come back to that at the end. And to be fair, I mean, for the last few years, getting into the UK on a German passport has been easier than getting back into Germany. Simply because the sort of electronic setup was much more advanced at Heathrow than it was at Berlin Airport. So we must be fair about it. But anyway, but do take our members' concern on board that people-to-people contacts are extremely important. I mean, that's what the society stands for, and anything that can make these contacts easier and smoother is of course much appreciated. Now let's perhaps turn to questions that have come up, and we have Edward Gamlin, who's put something in the chat, and I'll just read it out. According to the BBC, both the UK and Germany have recently increased their budgets on defense spending, yes. Perhaps in view of the US change in stance, especially as regards Ukraine. In your views, justified in view of Russia's greater recruitment drive, or might it not justify Russia's position, especially as Finland and Sweden are now both active NATO members, paying more attention to their borders? Do you think that Brexit has weakened the UK's position on many fronts, reflecting a different role within NATO too, given Britain's special relationship with the US? Is your own personal view on Brexit colored by your role as British ambassador to Germany? Well, that's quite a mouthful. Andrew.
I'm not sure if I'll do all of that justice, but I'll certainly try my hardest, Edward. Yeah. So the rationale for increasing defence spending, and I won't speak for Germany here, but I'll certainly speak for the United Kingdom, is associated with the position that we find ourselves in. We are threatened, and the first responsibility of any government is to provide for the defence and the security of its own people. And we took the difficult decision, and it was a difficult decision, to shift the spending on overseas development assistance. We are currently spending 0.5%. In future, we'll be spending 0.3% of GDP on overseas development assistance, and to move some of that funding over into defence spending, with a view to spending 2.5 and then 2.7%, with a trajectory further from that. With that very particular requirement in mind, we are defending ourselves, and if we frankly don't want to be fighting a war in future, then we need to be offering a credible deterrent, and that is the perspective. And to the second point there, I think Edward's second point, that justified by relation to Russia's greater recruitment drive. I mean, essentially, it's justified by our sense and our perception of the threat that Russia offers, and we look at this in the context not just of the United Kingdom, but of our responsibilities as a member of NATO. And the fact that Finland and Sweden are both active NATO members, in a sense that strengthens the alliance. I was ambassador in Sweden, in fact, and left the country in 2011. At that point, this was simply not a question, and it is a demonstration of the fact of how deeply and how far this discussion has changed, how significant the threat now from Russia that Sweden and Finland have indeed decided to become NATO members. As to Brexit, I mean, I think what I would say about this is that really since the beginning of this appalling conflict 3 years ago, Britain has unbroken taken a very strong, very considered leading role on the topic of Ukraine's right to defend itself, and our responsibility is to support Ukraine in that particular context. I don't think the question of our membership of the European Union or not has really altered that in any way, and I think it probably comes, and it's a question I'm very often asked, could you explain to us why there appears to be such strong support across the political spectrum throughout society in the United Kingdom for this position? And it reflects, I think, a very strong view amongst the population in the United Kingdom that we ought to stand by Ukraine at a time when its integrity and sovereignty is threatened in this way. And as I say, I think that is an authentically British view.
Yeah. Perhaps I can just read out another one that says, can we, in your view, develop the deterrents fast enough to face the threats we are facing now and in the near future? Well.
And that's a question from Andy. Yes, I can see. So, I mean, the first thing I'd say is that the deterrent exists today, Andy, and I think what we're saying here is that we need to think about this both in the context of how we defend ourselves today, but also how we strengthen our capabilities for the future. Partly because, of course, we are learning, and we're learning about how conflicts are fought today, and we need to adapt, and that means that we need new and different capabilities, and that in a sense is what sits behind quite a lot of this. But it is also a reflection of the scale of the threat that we face and the actuality of that threat. So if we're going to look at this from the perspective of deterrent, then partly how we respond to Ukraine and the conflict today, what we say about our willingness to support and defend Ukraine, that is, in a sense, the most potent deterrent that we have. So we are not toothless today.
Let me just take this a tiny bit further. Not very long ago, there was a wonderful story that a great plan to develop a tank together, UK and Germany, didn't work out because UK side insisted that the tank would need a tea-making device. And the German side said, no, that was rubbish and no tea making was necessary. And I think, I mean, with things developing as they are developing, we'll have to sort of get over that in some way or another, whether it's with tea or without tea. But can we be hopeful that we'll get over these sort of tiny little differences? Because if we want modern arms, I think it'll have to be a European effort. You know.
No, I really agree with that. I mean, first of all, I mean, I of course say that no defence industry is complete without the capacity to make tea. But you know, the truth of the matter is that we have bespoked a lot of our systems, even some of the common systems. We've adapted them to our sort of particular environments and needs. And that has posed challenges in terms of the interoperability of many of these systems. And that in itself, whilst we've found ways to work together, has not been the most efficient way to manage our defence. So I think there's widespread recognition here that we need two things. And the first of those is a defence industry across Europe and countries that will partner with us, that are allies and friends, that is capable of developing joint programmes in a genuinely joined up way. And the second is that we need to be developing systems that are able to work together, that are interoperable, operating the same standards. That's both most efficient, but also the most effective in terms of war fighting. So it's a big issue. It's not a small issue.
Yeah. I think I saw a hand up here earlier on. Yes, Detlef Gross from Brandenburg government.
Thank you, Mr. Strachwitz. Detlef Gross, employee of the state government of Brandenburg. Mr. Ambassador, British people narrowly decided to leave the EU. You can have whatever opinion you like on the EU, but do not require Putin's war aggression. The massive relativization of transatlantic coalition in the areas of security policies and economic trade policy, and the increasing challenges in view of the unresolved problems of sustainable development issues, climate change and migration, etc., even more far-reaching forms of European integration than the EU is and has ever been, and therefore even more far-reaching political formats and bodies that enable Europe to assert itself in a good shape. Specifically, what should these more far-reaching political formats of European states be? Do you then see the UK in a special role in Europe, or because the problems are the same for everyone, closer to the EU than ever before? Thank you.
Thank you, Detlef. I mean, I think it's difficult to say where the debate is going to go. I mean, do we see in some way today the lack of institutional machinery in some way being a hindrance for us? And I don't think that we do. I mean, I would say that nonetheless, first of all, NATO continues to be the bedrock of European security. We need to continue to invest in and strengthen and develop NATO as that primary vehicle for collective deterrence and defence. And possibly the biggest institutional change that's happened in the 3 years since Russia's invasion of Ukraine is the fact that Finland and Sweden decided to join the alliance, and that significantly strengthened the alliance, and to a degree, I guess, has addressed that question of where is the institutional weakness in our collective defence. As far as the sort of second part of your question, if I've understood it correctly, is concerned, I mean, there is a trajectory towards a sort of deeper integration of policies on questions such as sustainability. I mean, I think, here I would say that, and I started a little bit on this topic, there's 80 years since the Second World War, we have collectively invested a tremendous amount in building institutions based on consent and collaboration, the Bretton Woods institutions and subsequent institutions that have allowed us to collaborate on issues such as climate change at the UNFCCC that are the subject of considerable challenge today. And my way of looking at this is that it's very difficult actually to create new institutions, particularly in moments where there are real challenges to patterns of collaboration. Actually, the reasons why these have been such important institutions for us, those reasons are still valid. And I think that what we should be doing is reaffirming our confidence in those institutions and trying to rebuild trust in those institutions. What that requires is a combination of reform, because in many respects, part of the reason for the lack of trust is that people think that they're no longer really delivering, but also very active engagement by governments such as mine and Germany's government. And this is something that we are trying to do in the development context at the moment, but the backdrop is difficult. But I think rather than new institutions, I would invest effort in trying to strengthen those institutions that have stood us so well over the last decades. But I don't know, you probably have a view on that yourself, Detlef.
Thank you. Now I have Jochen Bittner here, who's put his hand up, and then I have one more in the chat. Jochen Bittner, please.
Thank you very much. And, Andrew, thanks for your time, and hello from London. Andrew, you said something very interesting early on, which was that there are often and warm conversations between the US and the UK government. And I wanted to ask you about the importance of speaking Trumpish in these days. It appears to me that the special relationship between the UK and the US might also be a crucial relationship for Europe in terms of actually understanding what Trump means when words fall out of his mouth. So, and it appears that the UK government is fairly advanced here. I couldn't imagine a German politician telling us that there are frequent and warm debates between the White House and Berlin. So, if this is crucial, to help us understand what Trump is up to, and how far can the UK be a translator between the United States and Europe?
Yeah, nice to see you, Jochen, and I do give my regards to London. I can still remember what it's like. I mean, I think, so the first thing to say about this is, those conversations are based on, as I've said earlier on, a very long history and patterns of cooperation that trust have talked about the institutions, that we built many of these institutions together, and that stands us, I think, in very, very good stead. I mean, are we a translator on behalf of other countries? I mean, I think the countries who are our partners in the world, I mean, they'll plough their own path on a lot of these topics, and nonetheless, it's, I think, really important that as we come together, and we've done this through the work we've done to bring the Coalition of the Willing together, that we do bring those different perspectives together around the table, and that's sort of valid and important and necessary, I think. But I wouldn't say that we believe that we have a right to speak on behalf of the United States. The United States speaks very much for itself.
Thank you. Let me read a question that's in the chat from Axel Berg, who says, German-French friendship, if it exists at all, how is the British government looking at it? As helpful, or at least sometimes as cumbersome? Sorry,
I lost the sound there for a second, Rupert. Could you repeat the question?
I'm referring to Axel Berg's message in the chat, where he mentions the German-French friendship, and he says, if it exists at all, how is the British government looking at it? As helpful, or at least sometimes as cumbersome?
Thanks very much indeed, Axel. I mean, again, it's difficult for me to comment on the relationship between two other governments who are very close partners, and frankly, from our perspective, the only thing I could really say about this is that we think that France is playing a really important role in Europe at the moment in helping to, alongside the United Kingdom, bring allies together as we think creatively about how we need to provide for security and sort of context of supporting Ukraine and working towards a solution that involves a ceasefire and then subsequently some form of a system that allows that then to become a permanent and a just peace. So France plays a very significant role in the midst of all of this. Germany is in a very particular condition at the moment, is it not? It's negotiating a coalition agreement with a view to pulling together a government that will then, I'm quite confident, take its place again. The German government is already very present in these discussions, but in a no doubt new way with a refreshed mandate, and we very much look forward to that. And it is ultimately in all of our interests that all of us have close and effective working relationships, and that we work together with those shared interests in mind. And it's I mean, I look around the environment at the moment, and I don't think I can remember a time when we've been, in our way of perceiving the challenges that we face, that we've been closer in that assessment. And I see that desire to cooperate as being both important and visible and necessary and strong.
Thank you. We're getting to the end of our time, but I did just want to ask you one other thing. You mentioned it very briefly, the bilateral treaty. Now, obviously, negotiating it came to a halt because the German government ceased to exist, so to speak. Where are we? How far have we got in actually negotiating it?
Yes, thanks, Rupert. I mean, we got a long way down the track, and I'm very pleased that we did, and in fact managed to complete two parts of that. So on the 23rd of October last year, the Defence Secretary and Boris Pistorius, the Defence Minister here, signed the Trinity House Agreement, so the defence and security dimension, or at least the first part of that. And the fact that we did that within a couple of months, testimony to the closeness and the importance of that work together on defence and security issues, but nonetheless a pretty magnificent achievement. And then on the 1st of December, the Home Minister here and the Home Secretary in London signed the joint agreement on migration, which again reflects a topic of very significant importance both here and in the United Kingdom, and already the first fruits of that closer relationship. As for the remainder of the treaty, well, we got a good way down the track. The negotiations were excellent. It wasn't complete at the point at which the German government fell, or rather fell in its ample form. And nonetheless, therefore, because of the work that we'd previously done on the treaty, in a very good position then to bring that back and start work again once there's a new government, and hopefully complete that very soon. So I'd be relatively optimistic about the prospects.
Okay, and you do get the impression that the new government will continue in the same vein on that particular issue?
So I have no particular concerns on that front, but of course we have to await the formation of the government and presume.
Yeah. Right. Last sort of intervention from Edward Gamlin, who says, as a Brit, having spent 7 years in New York, I really wonder whether the mentality is so similar. As Winston Churchill said, two countries divided by a common language and mentality, question mark. Any comment on that one?
Yes, I'm not sure I said that our mentality is similar. Certainly, But that's a different thing from saying that that we are capable of working well together, because history tells us that we genuinely are, and I'd be confident that we'll continue to work and want to work very, very closely together.
Right. I think I know you have to go for another appointment very shortly, so perhaps we'll wind it up here. Thank you very much indeed. It's been really interesting hearing you. What always strikes me these days on any conversation we have, that we really have shifted to a new phase. I mean, for a long time, we all believed that 1989, 1990 was sort of the major highlight of our lives. And now we're taught a very different lesson and have to adjust to perfectly new challenges. And I hope we'll be able to sort of meet them together. Anybody in this chat, I suppose, agrees with me on that one. One of the issues which we haven't been able to discuss is, of course, that we have common values. I don't really like that word values very much, because it's a sort of nondescript word, but we do have principles which we need to defend, and which we're seeing no longer valid in countries where we wouldn't have believed this a very short while ago. All we can do to preserve the rule of law, our democracy, our freedom of association, freedom of speech, all these civil liberties, is probably what really binds us together at this point. And I know that UK and Germany and a lot of other European countries are very united on that one. So thank you very much indeed. This has been really interesting, and I hope we will see more of each other as time goes on. For our members and friends who've been listening in, I just want to say that our next event will be the day after tomorrow. We're not usually quite as quick, but in this case we are. On Friday at 12 noon, we have Petra Schleiter telling us and discussing the Center for Democratic Resilience, both at the Großbritannien Center and the Center for British Studies, and online. I think it's fully booked as far as the center is concerned, but you're very welcome to register online. The website of Deutsch-Britische Gesellschaft will tell you exactly how to do that. And so I hope to see you there or at any other event. And with that, I think I'm more or less on time in closing this meeting so that you can get on to your next appointment. Thanks again, and thank you everybody for joining us tonight and for joining in the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks, Rupert.
Thanks.